Hi there. My name is Owen Bastable, and I'm a trainer with Project ReACT at the University of Oregon. Thank you so much for taking a look at this video. I will be briefly reviewing an activity called Elements of Culture, and giving you some examples to show you how to use this in your school or with your group that you work with. So to begin with, Elements of Culture is an activity that you can use to help staff reflect on their own values and norms. And it should also provide you some insights into your school culture. So I'll start with an example of how it might help you understand how values change over time. So if you think about yourself as a teenager, you might think back and consider how it was you expressed yourself, whether it's through how you dressed, the language you used, how you interacted with peers. And in some cases, you would probably find that your values and norms have changed since you were a teenager. However, there might be some examples where things actually have not changed that much since you were a teenager. We also like to use elements of culture to help understand our students and how our values and norms as educators both aligns but may not align or match with those of our students. So one of the ways you can use this is when you are defining your school-wide expectations. So if you're just getting started with defining, say, school-wide expectations through, say, a system like positive behavioral interventions and supports, or some other universal system you're using, it can be a great way to have a discussion about the norms and values that you're using to create those expectations. And I also wanted to give you the resource that this activity comes from, which provides more details on how to use it. And I will provide a link here on the bottom of the page, and it's called the PBIS Cultural Responsiveness Field Guide. I want to give you next an example of how to use this activity. So first off, I'm going to walk you through the tool itself, and then as we go through this, I'll give you some maybe some tips on how you might use this with your group or for yourself. So this is the Elements of Culture matrix, and in blue on the left side are examples of behaviors that you might want to explore. For example, use of profanity, appropriate personal space, voice level, and appropriate dress. In red at the top are ways of thinking about how norms and values may have been when you're growing up. So you would, in this column right here, how norms growing up, what would they look like for use of profanity, for personal space and voice level, and so on. How do they look today? How do they look currently as an educator in your school? And then how might those norms and values, those elements of culture may be different for the students or families that you're working with? And then do those differences create conflict? So let me give you an example for myself of how this would look for me. So starting with, I'll give you one example here of a row, the first row there, using profanity. So growing up for me, profanity around adults was definitely not okay. So swearing was definitely not okay, especially with my parents. Today, I do use some profanity, but it is only really with my friends, and it's not in work settings. When I'm working with students, if I hear it in general, use of profanity, I might I would give a warning to that student. If I hear a student using it to insult another student directly, that might warrant a ODR or behavior referral. When I thought about how this use of profanity might work with students and families I've worked with, one way it might be different, I think, is that in some cases, I think students were using profanity as a way to convey strong emotions in interactions that were really challenging for them. And then for myself, when I saw students or families using profanity, I would say that I found that to be disrespectful and did not see it as a way, an acceptable way to convey emotion. So that would have created and did create conflict for me when I was working with students. So I want to show you kind of the step-by-step of how to do this. So if you're doing this by yourself, you can kind of walk through it, or these might be directions that you could give to a group. So you would start by completing the rows on this document here. So use of profanity, personal space, and voice level matched with the columns on the top there. My norms growing up, my norms today. And following that, and that usually takes folks about 10 or 15 minutes. If you're doing it by yourself, it might be quicker. You can share out. Usually groups pick one row and get up. And so I would recommend doing this with a group of, say, grade level teachers, or maybe subject level, so that folks that are working together a lot on a daily basis probably makes most sense. And then following individuals completing this, so giving individuals within your group an opportunity to fill out this matrix, people can get up and walk around and share out personal ahas or how this might apply to their work in schools. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do this. If you would like at this time, you can just pause the video and then restart it when you've completed this the matrix. Okay, I'm going to finish with some variations on how you might use elements of culture, some adaptations. So first one is you could do this individually, and if you don't have an option to do this with a group, I'd highly recommend doing it anyway. It is nice to do it with a group because you can share and compare your experiences, your norms and values, and usually it's very helpful to hear and learn from others. And then you can also adjust this activity to match your school and community. And one way that we have done this is to use school data, which may be discipline referrals that you're looking at. So you might be looking at patterns and the types of behaviors that teachers are perceiving in student unwanted behavior. So that teachers may be writing up students a lot for defiance. They might be giving them referrals for disruption that relates specifically to language. You may also be able to draw on school climate data from surveys and things like that if you're using that in your school. The example I wanted to share with you is with the advent of COVID-19. Here is an example of a COVID-19 elements of culture activity. So you can see that the elements of culture are the same as the first example, with the exception of the box on the bottom, which I'll talk about in just a second, which is right here, appropriate response to insults. But if you look at the top here in red, you can see that it's been modified. So the first box here is the same, but now it's been changed to match COVID-19. And so you could ask staff to reflect on how their norms looked in 2019, right before COVID-19 started, and then what it looks like since the advent of COVID-19. So that's one way of adapting this activity. The other thing you can do, and I referred to data earlier, is to use your school discipline data or maybe other sources of data to understand what adults are perceiving as unwanted student behavior or challenging behavior for them. So you might find in your school discipline data that a lot of students are getting referrals for language, for inappropriate language or profane language. And so for this particular example, you could add, as an element of culture, appropriate response to insults, and have staff think about how that changed for them growing up versus today, and how that might be different for the students and families they work with. So wrapping up, there's a few discussion points that you might consider when you've done this activity. The first one we've talked about, how norms may have changed over time. We've also touched on this, but how your norms may differ from those of your students. And then how do we identify what the school norms are? So when we think about, again, defining our expectations, how would students define school-wide expectations if they were asked? And do they match up with what students' values and norms may be? That's a big discussion you can have, and it might help you think about how you're talking about your norms, or sorry, your school-wide expectations with your students. So there's lots of different applications for this activity, and hopefully this video has given you some ideas to get started using it. Again, if you wanted more details on using it, it's available through the Culturally Responsive Field Guide. The link is available here. You can go to it in Appendix H of this document on the right side of your screen. You are also certainly able to contact me, Owen, or any of the members of the Project Respond team. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this short video, and please let us know if you have any questions.